Hello, I'm Sarah Russell, former producer of the ADHD Skills Lab. I'm thrilled to introduce my latest project, the Neurodivergent Report, an educational podcast dedicated to empowering neurodivergent individuals with accessible scientific knowledge and amplifying their exuberant stories. In each episode, we'll explore topics like the genetics and heritability of neurodiversity, alongside practical strategies for managing executive dysfunction and emotional dysregulation. Together, we can learn to heal in community. However you are able to engage, thank you for being here. Hello, I'm Sarah, the host of the Neurodivergent Report, and today I'm here with
Jay, again.
also the host of the Neurodivergent
Yes.
Report. Yes, and today we are back for round 2 with Neurodivergence 101, sort of a kind of a big topic.
Lots of covers, so we thought we'd split it up into their own episodes. Yeah.
So last time you may have listened to sort of the theoretical showdown section where we talked about sort of the different approaches to managing and treating neurodiversity. So there's the medical model, the social model, and then the neurodivergence model. If you didn't listen to that conversation, you should go back and listen to that conversation.
This one might not make the most sense. So
yeah, totally not. We're not going to repeat ourselves a million times. Maybe a little. But this episode is really more focused on how to support neurodivergence. So it sort of presupposes that you are on board,
right,
with supporting neurodivergence under this model.
Yes. So it's really just taking the information from the last episode and making some actionable things that you or loved ones can do to support neurodivergent people.
So today, the paper that we're going to be talking about was published in 2021 by Karger's Journal of Human Development. And it's titled The Neurodiversity Approaches, What They Are, and What Do They Mean for Researchers.
Yes.
So again, really trying to advance the field and look at everything that already was in existence.
Yeah, and basically this paper is still a literature review, but it's newer than the one in the previous episode, and it's covering the same topics of these different approaches to neurodiversity, but they looked at just different pieces of literature in making this review and came to similar conclusions, right?
Yeah, they have pretty much the exact same limitation section and directions for future research, which I think is cool. This paper was like a year apart, so very much developed independently but contemporarily from each other. I really love how this paper, I'm just going to quote the paper real quick. For example, some claim the neurodiversity approaches focus solely on society and deny contributions of individual characteristics to disability, a controversial stance. Whereas this paper joins other literature in acknowledging the contributions of both individual and society to disability. Yeah, so it felt important to go back over that again because it sort of explains the difference between the medical model and the neurodiversity model, while also showing that there's a little bit of spiciness here. I wrote in my notes, the shade.
Yes. Yeah,
because they called out another paper. They called them controversial. They did not cite them by name. One thing this paper does that's different from the other as well is they have a conversation about who should their neurodiversity paradigm apply to. And they have a whole conversation around nonverbal autistics, what they call severe autism, and high support needs, which I know there's a lot of contention around even these terms. Really what they say here is these individuals can't advocate on their own behalf. And so we can only go with what we observe their behavior to be. And we hope that, when we see a reduction in harmful behaviors, then that indicates they are happy, satisfied, maintaining optimal quality of life.
Yes.
That's really the goal of the neurodiversity paradigm, optimal quality of life for the individual.
Okay, so we're going to go through the results, what they found. We're also going to talk about recommendations for future research. And then we're going to get into the thing that we're all excited for, which is based on this paper and the last paper, some how-tos on how to support neurodivergent people, whether that's yourself or somebody else in your life, or just being an advocate in general for neurodiversity. In results, it's mentioning the paper emphasizes that an interactionist or ecological framework considering individual environmental factors is more appropriate. Is that just the same thing or similar to the neurodiversity approach?
So I was also like, what?
Yeah.
And there's there's an example down here where intervention can happen at the individual level, like meds being given to the individual, and then also changing their environment, so like accommodating their sensory thing, like maybe it's reducing the light or
Lights
the
or something.
noise
Yeah.
stimuli, and that is accommodating both the environment and the individual. So yeah, I guess it is that combination, that interaction of nature and nurture.
The paper then later talks about, I'll just say the quote, neurodivergent individuals will likely have crucial insights regarding which approach would be most helpful for them, and their
Mhm.
preferences should be respected to the extent that that person can communicate them, which is not easy all the time.
No,
No,
to
but
know what they are nor to communicate them.
yeah,
The fact that they felt they needed to include the should be respected, their preferences should be respected, like that was necessary to say
okay.
because yeah,
It's
you were
not
just
always
scrolling on the internet. Yeah, it's not a given.
It's not a given. Yeah, so one thing that I wanted to note on this is I was watching a YouTuber called the Thought Spot. She's an autistic YouTuber, and she was talking about how sometimes she'll get comments because she very much advocates for exactly what we're talking about. And people commenting, you can't expect the world to accommodate you all the time, or what makes you or like autistic people so special where you need to have these accommodations. Or I'm sure the same thing could be said about
It's
any
so
kind of
sad.
neurodivergence. Right. And she said that she tries her best to, like filter away those comments or like not look at them. And not because she doesn't want discourse and it's not important
Mhm.
to have these kinds of discussions, but it's because when you're responding in that way, it's clear that you're not having a good faith discussion. And it's clear,
100%.
yeah, it's clear that like you have a specific conceptualization of what you think neurodivergence is and what you think is fair, and focusing on also what you would want. And instead of trying to explore the differences and understand what's going on, you're just fighting for your point. And she had a really great quote where she said, conversations that force you into a position of convincing rather than sharing is a good sign that you've already lost progress or that person is not able to engage.
I
um
love that. Metrics.
yeah,
We need those metrics as
yeah.
neurodivergent individuals so that we can protect our energy.
Yes, because the amount of times where like, I mean, I'm lucky where I'm mostly surrounded by very accepting people where it does feel like
Mhm.
sharing. But I've been in some situations where, yeah, I feel like I'm having to like convince people of not only number one, like my existence, but also of like why I might need certain things.
This is going to come off as really cliche,
Yeah.
but I always see that as they are so uncomfortable in their own bodies and they
Mm,
lack so much self-awareness about their own needs that they can't even imagine how selfish you are for like expressing your needs and
right.
your boundaries. Like how
Yes.
dare you?
Yeah.
Um Yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's way easier said than done, but I am trying so hard to just hold up a mirror and be loving to those people instead of like, wow, well,
Yeah.
you're a piece of shit for denying my boundaries. Wow, I guess this is an opportunity to slow way down and find out where we went wrong. Like, because this
Yeah.
miscommunication started way back, probably.
Yes, and which is so interesting because I think a lot of people something else that they could relate to, which is a very similar thing, is like intergenerational trauma and how like older generations will just not talk about things, and they'll have undealt with trauma and then potentially pass it on to like future generations. But then if the later generations, which mostly is maybe Gen Z, millennials, just people who are have access to like the internet and understanding like what's going on, and to have the vocabulary to talk about what they're going through when they put down a boundary, and then having those people be like you are being selfish for just because they don't know how to do that. They don't know that they're able to do that, and it's not normalized to have those boundaries. So yeah.
They weren't brave enough to do it themselves, and so they can't sort of
Yeah.
imagine that.
Yeah.
Scary. It might even trigger their own fight or flight.
Yeah.
So that's just,
Yeah.
yeah, neurodivergence runs in the family, y'all.
Heck yeah. So yeah. I was just talking about like trauma or like,
That's perfect.
but also yeah, like same thing with neurodivergence.
You know what? Research actually backs me up on the fact that like stigma towards mental health conditions is so easily ingrained, so like early
Mhm.
ingrained, that I mean, it says neurotypical people rapidly negatively judge and are less willing to interact with autistic individuals.
Mhm.
Um, Usually that research, I mean, I've read lots of studies on that, and usually that kind of research looks at whether the people know that this person has a diagnosis
Yeah, I was
versus
gonna ask.
whether they don't know. And
They just clock them.
the research around women with ADHD was so harsh because when they knew that they had ADHD, like, yeah, there was stigma, but when they didn't know she had ADHD, oh my God, was there stigma? It was like, what is wrong with this lady? And why
Yeah.
isn't she like adhering to all of these norms like I am?
Yes.
Let's be
Oh
aggressive
boy.
on her until she falls back in line.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and so that particular study was on ADHD women, but I'm sure there's different populations with likewise tragic results.
Yeah.
Um, there is no accommodation that supports that other than the population being accepting of
Yeah.
difference in behavior.
We
So
got a
double
lot.
empathy, because we touched that double empathy thing, where I was like, oh, well, people just need to get more accepting. But actually, no, people just need to be educated on the strengths and benefits of the neurodivergent.
Yeah.
Um, ADHD people, extremely creative, a million ideas,
Yeah.
novel, never never gonna
Never the
find someone
same.
who can talk faster.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, autism, pattern recognition is what I think of first.
Yeah.
I think of like this very stereotypical ones because I don't recognize my own autistic traits really yet.
Mhm.
But maybe hopefully with time, I don't know, can you think of a good example?
Like something else is that in this paper, they said that, for example, one recent study found that when participants believed their actions were unobserved by others, autistic individuals showed more ethically appropriate behavior than neurotypicals. But regrettably, the authors interpreted the findings as signs as deficits in autism. Yeah.
Reading this. I remember reading this, and yeah, I really do wish that the authors told us what specifically those researchers were measuring,
Yeah.
because that's what I mean, that seems to lack awareness.
Yeah.
Um
What stands out to me about this is the fact that they take something that's for most people like pretty much objectively a good thing, which
yeah.
is greater moral integrity, and that they flip that to be a deficit because it's found in people with autism, which is odd to me.
Yeah, the authors go on to say instead of assuming that autistic behavior is always pathological, the researchers might have found it helpful to at least consider whether the greater moral integrity they observed might be, in many ways, a good thing.
I
That's a real
love
quote from this research paper.
this research paper has been so like subtly sassy and like dragging like other
I
people.
wonder if it was cathartic to write.
I'm very much feeling like this person is having catharsis by writing this.
Their
Like I'm
manifesto.
feeling it. Oh,
It's a really common trope in autistic research that like autistics have deficient empathy. Um, I mean, yeah, I hope you heard all the contempt in my voice.
Yeah. Which is so funny to me because like some autistic people that I've met are the most like people pleasery people I've ever met. Um, so it's just that empathy can show itself not only like show itself in different ways, and that people have different approaches to being like how to make someone feel better. But then there's also this idea of different kinds of empathy. So there's emotional empathy and then cognitive empathy. So emotional empathy, it's also called affective empathy, is the ability to respond to another's mental state with an appropriate emotion. But then cognitive empathy is the ability to recognize what another person is thinking and feeling. So that means that you have to understand social
Oh, I
cues, you have to
see.
understand like inherent facial expressions, tones of
Oh, I
voice.
see.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this other paper that I found, which is called Reexamining Empathy and Autism, Empathetic Disequilibrium as a Novel Predictor of Autism Diagnosis and Autistic Traits, which was published in 2022. Empathetic disequilibrium is talking about when there's an imbalance between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. And what they found is that a tendency towards higher emotional empathy than cognitive empathy. So that's an empathetic disequilibrium towards emotional empathy that predicted both autism diagnosis and the social domain of autistic traits, while a higher cognitive uh, empathy over emotional empathy was a predictor of being non-autistic. So yeah. And also interestingly, empathetic disequilibrium was more prominent in autistic females. And what's interesting about that is that a lot of like the stereotypes of autistic people not being empathetic could also typically be with autistic men, and not to be like men are less empathetic than women, but women
Well,
are
yeah,
also
gender stereotypes reinforced like men can't show emotion and women must be
exactly
nurturing.
exactly. So there's gender
Women
stereotypes.
serve and
Yes,
men
right.
fight.
There's gender stereotypes. There's women masking and how they're more heavily incentivized to mask than men,
Mhm.
which that would be a whole other topic to go into. And also the idea of like oxytocin, like people who have more oxytocin, and there's men who have high oxytocin and women that have low oxytocin, but there's a direct tie. And I wish I also pulled the paper for this for oxytocin and empathy. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so we're talking about a lot of different ways about how empathy can be experienced differently depending on your neurotype and also displayed differently based on your neurotype. Something interesting, there is a paper that is called Autistic People's Experience of Empathy and Autistic Empathy Deficit Narrative. They ran a study where they asked 70, so it's 76 people, which is not a
I
huge
found it.
it's not a huge number, but they asked 76 autistic individuals about their own experience with empathy. And what they ended up finding is that there was a high proportion of hyper empathetic experiences, and that many respondents reported their empathetic responses to be overwhelming or even distressing, and that these different experiences of empathy contrast with the societal expectations of empathy. Someone who's autistic but but is being empathetic might not even realize it, and also might and the other person might not realize it because it feels stressful for them, maybe because they're trying to help them problem solve or because like they're just really feeling their emotions
Mm.
strongly. But that's just something to note,
Hmm.
because emotional regulation and sensitivity is something that is characteristic of both ADHD and autism. um, Something else too, that supports us from a different paper that's called Processing of Expressions by Individuals with Autistic Traits, Empathy Deficit or Sensory Hyperreactivity, kind of talks about overstimulation and burnout, and how that like if someone's overstimulated or burned out and they're trying to be empathetic, that's also another reason why them displaying empathy would look different. And on top of that, a lot of people who are neurodivergent also experience alexithymia. And alexithymia is
Ooh.
not being able to like pinpoint what emotion you're feeling. And then kind of the last two things that I
That
had.
can be a lot of it, just internal stimuli
Yeah.
in general as well. It can also be like puking and stuff like that, not just
Oh yeah.
emotions,
Yeah, it can
unfortunately.
manifest physically. Yeah. And then something else that's important to note is that because of the narrative that people that autistic people are not empathetic, like it's not crazy to think that there's that one of the reasons for an underdiagnosis of ASD is for there might be people who are autistic who are highly empathetic and maybe actually even know how to display it, and then they don't get diagnosed because people are like, oh, you're too empathetic, like you're too good at, like, yeah.
Hyperlexic
Yeah.
also.
Yeah. Like I remember, I mean, I'll like when I got diagnosed with autism last year, and they had me take a bunch of different exams, like, or assessments. Not it was getting reassessed in New York State for ADHD to get medication. And while I was doing it, I was like, I'll also get tested for autism because I have family members that have it. And when they were going over all the results, they're like, oh, it's so weird, like you scored like very like in the higher percentiles, like for people that have autism with like these assessments, and even like a masking one and one specifically for women. But it's so weird because like you scored like really high on this empathy assessment. And I'm just like, okay. I also know there's like, I've seen plenty of people uh talking about how this narrative is just not realistic for all autistic people.
So the misinformation and the stigma is so bad that my own pediatrician, talking about my 2.5-year-old, like with a significant speech delay, she
Mm.
said, "Oh, he doesn't have autism. He responds to his name and he can point at what he wants. He probably just has ADHD like you and your other child."
Oh my
And
goodness.
I just decided to take a deep breath and like not worry, like not throw a total fit in the doctor's office.
Mhm.
But I also knew immediately that I couldn't like trust her
Yeah.
professional opinion, and that I would likely need to find a more specialized pediatrician for my child.
Yeah.
So that's a better use of my energy.
Yeah. It's what we were talking about before. When you get, I mean, granted, it's like I know it gets tricky when it's like, oh, medical professional, and you don't want to be that
Could
person who's
I
like,
educate her? I don't know, maybe.
yeah,
Maybe she would
exactly.
listen.
Yeah. But I guess the
Is
part
it
where
my job? Absolutely not.
no,
Have I been through enough medical trauma? Absolutely. I'm
yeah,
done with doctors.
yeah.
Go take a course about it.
I'll see you after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sarah, thank you for sitting through my whole spiel. I had a
You're
lot
awesome.
I wanted to get through. So
Well, so that's good. I mean, now we can finally get to the limitations of this paper and the other paper for what it's worth. They both, were lit reviews. They weren't metas, they weren't systematic reviews. They couldn't be because of the wide usage of just terms. People aren't using things to mean the same thing in the papers, and so it makes it difficult to then compare the results of those papers. That is something that we really need to fix.
mhm.
If you take one thing away from this this podcast, researchers use terms that are already in existence. Please stop creating new ones. Thank you. Thank you so
Love
much.
Sarah and Jay.
And for what it's worth, you would produce better social research if you include the populations that you are researching. Not only in like conceptualization stuff, but also just in like just study design in general. An ADHD person or an autistic person can't possibly sit through this test. You're not going to get a whole lot of data.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Which actually, both of these papers did a really good job on. Both of the papers that we talked about the last couple of weeks included someone on their research team who was autistic or ADHD or both.
Mhm.
And I think that's really important.
Okay, so how to support neurodivergence using the neurodiversity approach. We're getting into it.
I'm going to read the categories first, and then we can go into specifics afterwards. So the first thing is that we all need to understand and value neurodiversity. And I think we could just even say diversity.
In general.
The second one is to create inclusive and epistemically just environments. The third, we're trying to promote understanding and respect in our interactions. Adapting research practices is going to be necessary, as well as tailoring interventions and supports to meet the needs of the neurodivergent people that they are for. So that's sort of like the whole thing.
The roadmap.
And I feel like we can talk specific now. So we'll just go back up to the number one.
So we just read the list. We're going to get into the specifics. That number one was understanding and valuing neurodiversity and just diversity in general. So some actionable things you can do to do that. Recognize that neurodiversity is a natural form of human variation, just like biodiversity. I think we've talked about that a few times on this show. This means that diverse minds and brains exist, and that's just the reality. And that in certain contexts, they will be advantageous, just like any other form of diversity in characteristics. Another thing, moving away from the paradigm of pathology and embracing the neurodiversity paradigm, which promotes recognition and inclusion of natural neurocognitive diversity. So instead of pathologizing, ADHD as a disorder, in the last D in the name, same thing with autism, embracing it just as purely neurodiversity. Another thing, understanding that neurodiversity is a term of inclusion that applies to everybody, whereas neurodivergence is a term of exclusion referring to individuals whose cognitive profiles diverge from the norm. So neurodiversity is if you have a brain, you are part of neurodiversity. It's just everybody's has their own neurological system going on. And then 4, valuing potential contributions of neurodivergent individuals to societal stability, similar to how biodiversity is essential for an ecosystem to be stable.
Yeah, sort of like everybody plays a part.
Yeah.
So the next chunk of things is about creating inclusive and epistemically just environments. So that's things like focusing on adapting the societal environments and cultural niches to accommodate different cognitive profiles rather than trying to cure or normalize neurodivergent individuals. Understanding that social quote unquote deficits associated with neurodivergence can be culturally maintained, like upheld, because of the inequitable access to resources. If you only pathologize the behavior but never address the societal root of the problem, you're going to continue to have that behavior, whether you stigmatize people to death or not. Like, suicide rates are really high for neurodivergence. Divorce rates are super high for neurodivergence. And it's in part because of the stigma.
Yeah, college dropout rates really high for neurodivergence. Unemployment rates really high for neurodivergence.
Yeah. And then this section also talks about implementing social policies that increase the inclusiveness of culture, sort of make it so that people can access culture and cultural spaces. Who wants a library that isn't wheelchair accessible? So that sort of thing. There's a quote in the paper talking about how the optimal neurodiversity approach needs to both have the acceptance of the individual piece, but also advocate for respectful use of language to describe them. None of the R word kind of thing. And then they go on to say, even if the disabled individual has access to meaningful interventions and even if they are able to gain new skills, that doesn't matter if they inherently feel deficient.
Yeah, or even
They need to be,
disrespected.
yeah. Um, Microaggressions. We think
Yeah,
about that concept in sort of a racial construct, but this happens to disabled people all the time,
to any
particularly
minority.
ones who are like invisibly disabled.
There are a lot of people who say stuff like, "Oh, why do I need to use like flowery language and like, oh, like your feelings and blah blah blah." Well, the two biggest reasons to use respectful language is one, you're not going to have a productive conversation with someone who is upset. Like I think there are a lot of people who probably are good at maybe compartmentalizing or even regulating like strong negative emotions, but that that person should not have to engage with someone that's being disrespectful to them. And number two is using respectful language is also another way to say using language that is accurate. And we've talked a few times on this show about how having shared language and talking about the same things is really the only way that you can continue effectively in a conversation. So the kinds of people that would say like why do I have to use respectful language? Like why do I have to like take care of your feelings? It's because it's that's how you have productive conversations with people. Yeah.
Yeah, the point of communication is to like have an ongoing dialogue. It's not to like use your platform to talk down to another person.
Yeah. It's about exploring with someone instead of just forcing what you want. Because then what's the point of talking with somebody else if you're not
Yeah.
trying to hear what they
Doesn't
have to
sound very
say?
welcoming or accepting
Yeah.
anyway.
So
So,
just to kind of like recap where we are, we went through for the how tos, we went through ways to understand and value neurodiversity, to create inclusive and epistemically just environments. And now we're starting to touch on promoting understanding and respect in interactions. So, one way that we can do that is recognizing that everyone's going to talk differently, communicate
mhm,
differently, and present things differently. And it's more
yeah.
important to focus on the content of what they're saying rather than them presenting it in a very specific way.
Yeah. And the next point is actively working to counteract bias. So when you're out in real life, in the field, on the internet, whatever, maybe you're studying these neurodivergent individuals. Like we need to constantly be on the lookout for our own bias, our own projections, and things like that. Um, Listen to neurodivergent people talk about their own experiences and perspectives. There's a lot to learn from lived experience.
I think a lot of times it can be easy to look at someone who is neurodivergent and see how they're communicating and then immediately label it as a deficit because there's already, disorder in the name or they're a minority, but it's really important to see that communication differences are a two-way street, and communication issues are a two-way street. So what you might interpret as a deficit in social skills is more accurately just a difference in social norms and expectations and communication styles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
different priorities.
Yes.
Yeah,
Like where,
totally.
where one person wants to get straight to the point, one person might think it's more important to um, have a bunch of context so that the other person can fully understand what they're saying. And the other person might not think it's necessary, but the other person might think it is.
Hmm. So the next section is about how to adapt current research practices to better fit the neurodiversity paradigm.
Researchers,
Um,
hear our plea.
like study individual neurodivergent people and the context around them. Make sure to include the environmental factors like stress levels or,
Yeah,
I don't know, something that makes you
yeah,
unwell. Um, yeah, but the paper goes on to talk about how it's not always feasible. Like it's kind of a privileged position for a neurodivergent to be in academia in a research capacity, and so they have like an intermediary called community-based participatory research. So it's sort of just like having neurodivergence in the community join a board or like join a club,
yeah,
and help like shape the future of research.
yeah. Sorry, I don't know if it's getting picked up, but Echo is having his like 3 o'clock whaling session.
Like a
I'm just gonna
panic
go,
attack.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go grab him because he just likes to be held. So I'll just be back in 1 second.
This is about to be a marvelous example of co-regulation.
You want to sit on the
It's
desk?
okay,
You
baby.
can sit on the desk, baby. There you go. Take a little nap right here. Both of my cats are very much this way. Like they will just both meow and then they just, oh, and the second one has also appeared. Yeah, baby. Okay. You're chilling. So, another thing to hopefully adapt into research practices would be investigating neurodivergence individual strengths and how it can be used to promote success and thriving, and also still acknowledging areas of challenge, but looking at it like as individuals, because every single neurodivergent person has their own strengths and weaknesses, just like how every neurotypical person has their own strengths and weaknesses.
Right. Right. And also looking at how environments and like the social situation that you're in can either disable or promote your own resilience, but particularly in neurodivergent people.
So another thing too, being mindful of potential testimony injustice where neurodivergent individuals' accounts may be unfairly dismissed. So really respecting someone else's perspective and trying to understand like where they're coming from and just giving that person like highest positive regard.
Yeah, and even sometimes people just don't have the language to communicate their own experience. Um, in the research literature, like RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, is kind of talked about, but only because enough ADHD people were like, "Ooh, this is a really uncomfortable topic, and I'm gonna get like vulnerable with my
Oh,
clinician about it."
yeah.
Um, yeah, but we don't always have that. Like that process takes time. So there might even just be experiences out there that we don't fully understand in the research. And then the last section is really just about tailoring the interventions and supports to be more supportive of neurodivergent individuals, sort of letting them like self-select what tools they try. Yeah, so how are we thinking about doing that?
Yeah, like not having it be cookie cutter, having a variety of tools and skills that they can have at their disposal and being able to make modifications to those to fit their specific lives. Um,
Yep, individual differences, environmental differences.
yes, with just the intention of enhancing their quality of life to just have the best quality of life that they can.
Yeah, I mean, like, what are we measuring here?
Yeah,
Why are we studying these people? Because
right.
we want to enhance their quality of life, not
Yes,
because we want to pathologize them and put them down.
yes,
We want everything to be better, and so we always need to think like, what is the outcome of this study? What am I measuring? Am I looking at things correctly?
right.
Um,
And I don't think no one's trying to give neurodivergent people like special treatment. No one's trying to be like, oh, we need to like just like we need everything to cater to them and them never to have a struggle in the world. It's not that. It's just to be at the same playing field as people who are neurotypical and trying to get themselves to a quality of life that is comparable to your average neurotypical person. So, also in tailoring interventions and supports, avoiding interventions that are aiming to just normalize neurodivergent people and to make them just basically mask and hold back
yeah.
or not accommodate or not have it be seen those things like things that are inherently neurodivergent, especially if they already suppress self-regulatory behaviors like stimming or
Hmm.
intense interest because these things enhance their
Yeah.
well-being.
Honestly, I used to be an ABA person,
I wasn't sure if
and
we were going there, but heck yeah.
yeah, I used to be an ABA person, and one of the targets was like stimming. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, but what are we doing to support that this child is actually
Regulating.
moving
Yeah,
and okay and able to do the other targets? And yeah, it was like deer in the headlights sometimes. And I
yeah.
just couldn't do that job for very long.
Also, yeah, focusing on teaching a
Teaching adaptive skills. So that's like that modifying thing again. So if you can't put your shirt on over your head, learn to put your
yes,
shirt on like through the side, wear just like one's button-up shirts kind of thing. Yeah. And it's
being a
not
metaphor for modify.
and it's not like, oh man, you have to wear those shirts. It can't be like
you have to wear the weird shirts you put on the side. Like that's a perfect metaphor for like, yeah, if someone needs to do something differently, that's not the weird way. It's just a different way of doing it that works for them. Yeah.
This last point is just about how, like, it was the authors calling out the research community for not talking to the autistic community about the harms of ABA, and how they just kept pushing it off and being like, no, like, our treatment is fine. But the community rallied against it so hard that they ultimately did kind of kill ABA. Like, everybody's like rebranding themselves now. But anyway, I just wanted to include that because it's so important for researchers, academics, doctors, practitioners, support people to be talking to the community that they are serving. You don't know better than somebody who has lived with their brain forever. Like, you don't know more about their personal experience than they do, no matter what books you've read on the topic. Like,
exactly.
Impossible. So like, if your community that you're trying to support is telling you like, hey, I think this is harmful to me, listen to them and change it ASAP. Because that's terrible. Don't do that.
Do that. What are we doing?
What are you doing?
And overall, I think that the hope of this episode was to have people be able to advocate for themselves, to have other people engage in effective conversations and advocacy for their neurodivergent friends and people in their life, and also for researchers and doctors, yes, to implement these things hopefully into their work to further support neurodivergent people.
I feel like the past 30 years has been huge for mental health.
Yeah.
For mental wellness, for like shared experience too. Psychology used to be very much about like the individual experience, but now we're seeing how similar all of our experiences actually are. Like, oh, I'm an individual. I make my own choices. Like, you're not unique though.
Yeah.
There's a million of you. Speaking of, if you're me, please let me know. I am dying to meet you.
Yes. So I was gonna say before too, is just like, if any of like what we're saying like resonates with you, or like you have something further to add, like if you're listening to this on a platform where there's comments, like please leave us a comment. Like we want to have a dialogue with you too.
Yes, we would love to respond to comments. It would be so exciting to go and find one somewhere. Yeah, even if it's just helped you to consider like your life a little bit differently, and like, oh, why do I do things this way?
Yeah.
And like, is it actually suiting me the best way? Those are also, making individual changes is difficult, but it can make a difference,
Yes.
according to the research.
Yeah.
So,
and that's what we're here for.
Thank you for being here. If you want to connect with the Neurodivergent Report, you can find us at ND Report Pod on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube. If you're looking to support the show, the best thing you can do is to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Please. You can check out ndreportpod.com for more information, or if you want to be a guest contributor. Until next time, be well, do good.